So yesterday, which was Wednesday, October 9th, officers from our special response team, it's kind of like our SWAT team. It's volunteers. They come from different parts of the department. But members of our special response team, our SRT, were working together with our federal partners from the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the U.S. Marshal Service. And they were in the Fern Forest area, which is kind of near Volcano, and they were looking for a fugitive. It was yesterday in the morning. I think they started looking for the fugitive around 6 or 7. And about 10 o'clock or so, they were unable to locate the male, but they were all still kind of in the area. So in a completely circumstantial situation, patrol officers are then sent to an address on Hawaiʻi Street, which is in Mauna Loa Estates. So Mauna Loa Estates is about maybe 12 to 15-minute car drive away from Fern Forest. So while we had our SRT team and our federal partners 10 to 15 minutes away, officers get called to the second address for a completely unrelated incident. So when officers arrive at the second address on Hawaiʻi Street in Mauna Loa Estates, they get sent because a neighbor is noticing that there's a man who's going in and out of a neighbor's property. It's a person who appears to be on the property without permission, and he's going in and out of the house. So the neighbor is concerned and calls patrol officers to respond. So this morning, yesterday morning, patrol officers respond up to Mauna Loa Estates, and they see a male standing outside the house, and they approach him to talk to him. And when they approach him to talk to him, at one point, he brandishes what appears to be a handgun, and he threatens officers and retreats back into the house. So the officers call for additional assistance because they're facing now a potentially armed man who is, in a house where he might not be allowed to be. So additional officers respond, and the other officers who respond include the SRT members, who are, like I said, about 10 to 15 minutes away after not being able to locate the fugitive they're looking for. So the SRT team responds, and the first thing they do is they establish a pretty robust perimeter around the outside of the house. They talk to the officers at the scene, and they attempt, our hostage negotiators are there as well very quickly, having come from Fern Forest, and they attempt to establish a dialogue. They attempt to communicate with the male who is in the house. So the male who is in the house is later identified as 58-year-old Sean Edward Page, who is a Big Island resident, but he doesn't have a permanent address to refer to. So the SWAT team, the SRT team, and the negotiators arrive with the federal partners to try to talk to Page and negotiate with him, find out what the deal is, try to get him to come out of the house, and so that they can resolve this issue that the officers got sent to. At one point, the officers decide that we have a cell phone, and we use a cell phone to communicate with suspects in these kinds of situations. So the officers approach the house in order to deliver a cell phone and then retreat so that the male can retrieve the cell phone, and now we can have a telephone conversation. And as officers approach the house in order to drop off the cell phone to talk to the suspect, Mr. Page, fires his handgun at the officers through the closed front door. So the SRT officers then retreat, and we establish a perimeter and continue to try to negotiate and communicate with the male. The negotiations and communications are very sporadic. There are occasionally shots that are heard being fired in the house, but we don't believe there's anybody else in the house besides Mr. Page. So at this point, he's we consider him to be a barricaded suspect as opposed to an active shooter. So officers have established a perimeter, and this attempt to communicate and negotiate lasts well into the evening and into the overnight hours. And then finally, this morning, after several hours of not seeing any motion in the house, not getting any communication from Mr. Page, the officers decide shortly after 9 o'clock this morning to enter the house. So they enter the house in order to clear it and arrest Page for threatening the officers with the gun and attempting to shoot at the officers through the front door with the gun earlier in the day. So they enter the house in an attempt to arrest Page for attempted murder of the police officers. So when the special response team enters, we think that there are five officers who initially make entry on the team. And of those 5 officers, immediately as soon as they enter the house, they're met with gunfire. So Page begins firing at the officers actively from inside the house from a secured position. One of the 5 officers was able to return fire and shoot at Page. We believe that officer fired 2 rounds, which fortunately didn't strike Page. So Page is uninjured, essentially. So as this gunfire is being traded back and forth, another member of the special response team, in an attempt to avoid this active gunfire that he finds himself in the middle of, dives off to the side. And as he dives off to the side to dive out of the way of the gunfire, he crashes into a broken window. And then the broken window causes some injuries to the officer later on. So Page is in the house. He's shooting at the officers. One officer shoots back, firing at least 2 rounds. Another officer has dived out of the way of the broken window. And in all of this commotion, the officers are attempting to retreat back out of the house to regain some sort of tactical advantage or defense. And Page is able to escape out of another part of the house. So we see Page escape from the other part of the house, and the officers immediately set up an even larger containment area, a larger perimeter. Unfortunately, this perimeter contains a very heavily wooded area, kind of a forested area. So we know he's in this area somewhere. And after about 40 minutes or so, 40 minutes to an hour of searching through this, combing through this area while establishing a perimeter, we were eventually able to locate Mr. Page hiding in that wooded area. So some other information that I'm sure you're going to be interested in. The officer who fired at Page is a police officer 3. He's assigned to the Vice Section, and he has 14 years of service. He'll be placed on administrative leave, as is standard following any type of critical incident. And the point of this administrative leave is, not to accuse the officer or to, try to initiate a criminal case. The point of the administrative leave is to give the officer a chance to recover and recuperate from this critical incident that they just went through, and to make sure that they're mentally, physically, and emotionally prepared to come back to work. So as is standard, as we're doing our critical incident review, we'll also do a professional standards review to make sure that the actions of all the officers at the scene were within policy as well. The officer who was injured is an 18-year veteran from our South Kohala Patrol District. So our SRT team is actually made up of volunteers that come from different parts of the department. So when we have an SRT activation like we did on Wednesday, then these officers get called from their regular assignments, and this SRT is kind of like an additional supplemental duty that they have. So the officer who was injured is an 18-year veteran with our South Kohala Patrol District. Fortunately, we originally believed that his injuries were pretty serious. But fortunately, we were able to transport him to a local hospital and receive several dozen stitches to his leg, but he was fortunately, again, treated and released. So no serious injuries resulted from this pretty harrowing experience. Lastly, Page, when he was located and arrested, was located with a firearm that we believe he used to shoot at the officers. So we don't think that there are any firearms that are kind of on the loose. Fortunately, again, Page did only receive minor injuries. We don't believe that he was struck by the gunfire. He was also treated at the scene, and he was transported then to the East Hawaiʻi Detention Facility here at the Hilo Station, where he is awaiting criminal charges. Finally, the officers, before they made entry into the house this morning, were able to obtain a search warrant, which facilitated their entry. And after this, the scene was kind of calmed down and the suspect was in custody. Then they went to execute the search warrant. And in executing the search warrant, we located 2 additional operable firearms inside the house. And then concerningly, we also located a small improvised explosive device inside the house as well. So we're still holding the perimeter of the house. We have bomb technicians from our federal partners and from other county police departments that are on their way. And hopefully within the next half hour or so, they're able to get up there to that scene in Mauna Loa Estates and make an assessment and determine, if we can, what we need to do to deal with the improvised explosive device. But we do have what we feel is a relatively safe perimeter to make sure that all the neighbors and the other people who might be in the area are kept at distance until we're able to deal with the improvised explosive device. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions.
Chief, there was a dog mentioned in the release. Was there a dog found there? And if so, was the dog injured? Was he taken into custody? Does animal control have the dog?
I'm not sure on the disposition of the dog. I was told the dog wasn't injured, which again is fortunate. The injuries in this case aside from the officers who have several dozen stitches on his leg, the injuries could have been much, much more severe. So we're very fortunate. You're right, there was a dog. So as the officers originally approached the residence, they recognized Paige from another criminal case that they have involving the dog, and they recognized dog and they recognized Paige, which is why they kind of approach him to talk to him and figure out, does he belong at the house, or what's the situation with this other case. But before they even have the chance to really get too deep into the conversation, Paige retreats into the house, brandishes a firearm at the officers, and then drags the dog in the house and closes the door.
An officer-involved shooting was mentioned. Is that basically the officers having discharged their firearms as opposed to shooting somebody?
Correct. So the one officer, the 14-year veteran from the Vice section, did discharge his firearm. We believe he fired 2 rounds in the direction of the threat, at Mr. Page, who was actively shooting at them. The other thing I forgot to mention that I'll just mention before anybody asks is body cams. So we, our special response team officers, that's basically our SWAT team members, don't have body cams on in the field. So I'm not sure what, if any body cam footage of the actual shooting incident occurs, but I do know that the officers who initially responded to the suspicious male complaint did activate their body cams, or at least 3 body cams that I know of. I haven't seen them yet. But I believe that they portray the kind of opening few moments of this situation where the officers kind of approach, they encounter Paige, he brandishes a firearm and retreats back into the house. And I'm told some of those videos are several hours long, so I'm not sure if they overlap the time where Paige is then shooting back out of the house at the officers or not. I just haven't gotten that far yet.
Is the previous incident concerning the dog, is it a dog bite or is it a stray dog, or do you know?
I don't know. I can find out and I can definitely get back to you, John.
Okay, his name is not familiar to me. That's one of the reasons I'm asking that. That's, and as you know, I pick up the blotter every morning, so a lot of names I've seen in court, I recognize the name.
Yes, I think Paige just has one previous arrest for something for relatively minor and not related. So, but I can find out about the dog case.
Thank you.
Of course.